Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. I am your host, Lindsay Pritchard Fox. Today, I have Kelly Kahn, who is the Vice President of Project Management for ClearEdge3D. Welcome, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here. It's just a shame I don't drink coffee.
Well, yeah, I don't even have my cup of coffee right now. But so to give our audience a little backstory, Kelly and I have worked together on, you're looking at us on YouTube, Scan to BIM, Scan to BIM University, wearable diploma. So I think one of the pain points Kelly and I share is we love the technology that's pushing into the construction industry, and we're frustrated because there's a lack of accessibility to good information, good know-how, good workflow. And I would say that's kind of ClearEdge's niche in the market, is really integrating the technology and the workflows. So your background is really interesting. Can you just give us a quick run through of where you are, how you got there?
Yeah, sure. So currently at ClearEdge3D, we make technology solutions for the construction industry, and we really are focused on a very narrow niche. We basically do computer vision to automate processes, when applying reality capture technologies to the construction industry. So really focused niche. But yeah, how I got here, it's kind of a long and winding story, I guess. But started out in the architecture side of things, got a degree in architecture. I guess got 2 degrees in architecture from University of Texas at Austin, Horns, and went straight to work for a design build company because I had a really interesting experience in college. We did the solar decathlon, and I just loved that direct connection with designing it all the way through building it. And so when it came time to pick a firm, I actually took the lower paying offer so I could go.
What drove you to that firm as a student?
They did design build. So the other firms that I had offers from were great firms. They did great work, but they were design firms. And Beck was a design build firm. And so just really loved that experience so much on the solar decathlon that I knew I wanted to work at a design build firm. So packed my bags, moved to Dallas, and worked at Beck for about 10 years. And it was a great experience. Went from the architecture side to the technology side to the construction side, back to the technology side. Ended up running the virtual design and construction effort for that company for about 5 years.
Well, I feel like I did read your bio, which is quite robust on LinkedIn. And I love that because it gives, when I'm reading through that, I've known you for a few years now, and everything that you're, pushing out into the universe is, you wear it. And when I'm literally wear it. And so I'm reading through the way that you presented your timeline. And I'm like, this makes perfect sense. So when you're a student of architecture, in the years that was in the early 2000s, and you're getting, what type of technology existed when you were a student?
Oh man,
were you using, because we know that Revit existed in 2000. This is 2003?
Yeah, I started in 2000 and graduated by 2006 with the second one, with the master's. But yeah, they weren't, universities are notoriously behind in teaching technology to students. It's actually a big frustration that I had while I was in university, because I wanted to be using some of these new applications, but we basically nobody would let us use them. It was even a stretch to use CAD in a lot of studios. And I was using Form Z because there was a professor at the university that knew Form Z and would help us with it. And so I would, oftentimes use Form Z in direct opposition to the professor. And then, do some hand drawing at the end just to say I did some hand drawing, right? But yeah, I was doing Form Z, trying to do rendering, and this is back when rendering, took 6 days on a computer, and and you'd get the rendering, you'd go like, oh, that looks like crap.
I put the wrong thing there.
Now I have to do all this stuff and do it again and wait another 6 days. And now it's like, there's flipping Inkscape and you click a button and it's real time and you're like, oh, this is amazing.
I mean, it really, really unlocks the design eye for sure.
Oh gosh, I like this, I wish the technology tools were there when I was a design student, because it's like the ability to be in VR designing and making adjustments and have that feedback, in perspective is just, oh my gosh.
There's no limit to how much anyone's imagination, even if you're a professional, even if it's like your field of study, can imagine what that 3D space is going to feel like as you're sketching it in line form. And that's kind of crazy because we do, like, when I get guests on, that's kind of one of the things I like to cover is there's a bunch of students that are right now going through a decision-making process of where they're going, what they want to study. They're curious about, they might be curious about design. It's very compelling. And then they'll get into institutions, and it may or may not be relevant to what's actually happening in the industry. So talking to your younger self, talking to the students that are now deciding, what are some key things that they can differentiate the programs that they are looking for to get into?
I mean, the good news is I think that technology doesn't really matter that much when you're in school. I mean, I think it's really important that you learn to use a technology as a tool, because at the end of the day, it's just like hand sketching, right? If you don't practice, if you aren't using it regularly, you won't be facile with it. And so, while it's really easy to blame, the old fogies that I went to work with, old fogies. I mean, gosh, they were the same age I am now, but they felt like old fogies when I was just
when we were younger.
Right, I know, right? But anyway, the old fogies, they weren't facile with those tools. And so asking them to pick up those tools in their, 40s and start, they could not design as effectively and as well in those tools as they could in AutoCAD or as they could with a pencil.
Yeah, let's tell Picasso that he can only use Procreate.
Yeah, and he'll suck. Right. And so
miss out on a key piece
for 3 years, and then he'll make beautiful work. Right. But it's there's that learning curve with any technology. And so I think though there's not vast differences between ArchiCAD versus Revit versus anything else. And so I think it's really important that you learn a BIM application in college now if you're a student, because that will give you kind of the skill set. So it's like, oh, well, I used a number 2 pencil and now I'm using a number, I moved to 4H because I want these lines. And I have to learn that I can't press as hard, or, there's little things you'll learn, but if you're good with a pencil, you're good with a pencil, little changes aren't gonna wreck your world. If you're good with a BIM tool, you'll be good with any BIM tool. You just need to learn the little nuances and proclivities of that particular tool. But got to learn something BIM. If you're going in design, got to learn real-time rendering, in my opinion. You just need to understand that feedback loop and how effective and efficient it is at making good designs. I mean, it's just such an amazing tool. But I don't know.
Maybe it's not necessarily about a software specific application, but maybe the mindset of the institution and whether or not they're open. Because that was kind of our experience, was that we were able to select the platform that we wanted to work in. There was very little support in learning that tool or learning best practices, which is why I loved being part of Scan to BIM, because we do talk about, there's a bunch of tools, but there's a specific way to efficiently use them versus this is the measure tool. I'm like, no, I'm not using that one. Stop it.
Well, I love the measure tool. It's fantastic.
So I would say that like you experienced like there was actually suppression of like the opportunity to use technology.
Active.
And so that might be a cultural thing for a student to assess when they're looking into their programs, is whether or not the program is open to that technology and whether they're giving you support or maybe even access to industry professionals, like current industry professionals that they can relate to or have a conversation with about like, what does it look like on the other side of this degree?
Right. No, it's a great thing to ask and understand. I think, fortunately, most universities now have jumped on the BIM bandwagon. I think there's at least a couple professors there that will know some tool and help you with some tool, but it's man, I tell you what, the universities will always be behind on the technology side, though. I think that's just endemic to the institution, because you end up with, typically older licensed architects or unlicensed, teaching. You have the couple.
Hard to get talent. It's hard to get talent. That'll be, especially if it is. And it's unfortunate because they do feel like there's a lot of legacy knowledge that needs to get passed down, but how do you merge the two? And so I think it's really interesting that like on your way out of your program, you actively sought to have a company that did the design and build. And was that simply because you recognized that the two disciplines are not in isolation?
Well, if I think back to my architectural heroes, right? My big architectural heroes were, Frank Lloyd Wright or was Kahn, or, they were master builders. They weren't architects, right? And then I had my experience with Solar Decathlon, and I also love to build things. So, I did an addition to the house that I was living in as a student. I did all this stuff myself. So it was, I don't know, it was a natural jump for me. It didn't require all that much thought, because it felt right. It's like, yeah, of course they're the same thing. I mean, they're directly connected. And if you understand how this works, then you can do a better job at this, and vice versa.
What were the triggers that gave you the opportunity to, because you were kind of were you spearheading the BIM implementation? Had they heard of BIM? Were they already curious about it? Were you just like the key person?
They were BIM curious. I've actually heard that term many times before, actually. We gotta put the hashtag. They're BIM curious, right? So yeah, they were in their BIM curious phase. They were actually they were actually using Form Z. So at the time, their technology stack was a mixture of hand sketching and Form Z for design, and then AutoCAD for documentation. And so they were already doing 3D modeling, which I really liked. A lot of the firms I interviewed at, 3D modeling was kind of an afterthought. It was only done for rendering. It wasn't done for the design process. But I loved the fact that the design principal and the guy that I worked under directly, who's now director of design for the company, basically they were using Form Z as their primary design tool. So I knew it. I came in, I plugged in. It was great. I did that for about 9 months. Did a lot of bathroom elevations in AutoCAD as well. Did a lot of, really tedious, terrible things. Determined that those things were a waste of my life and my time. And then I got put on the first Revit job. So we had done some little playing and experimenting with it. And Brian, the guy that's now director of design for the firm, Brian kind of pushed it to the point where we did it on one project. I was on that job. It went terribly. We were like 5x over budget.
No, it makes everything better.
5x. It was nuts. Like, it's literally the worst project in the company's history by like a factor of 2.
Okay.
Terrible. And so, and it was like, it was the worst. Like, we picked the worst possible job, which you're probably thinking, oh, it was complicated. No, we picked the worst possible job. It was super simple. It was a movie theater. And here's the thing, that part of the business was like a machine, because they had everything templated, everything formatted, everything like already done in CAD. And so the budgeted hours for it were built on everything already being done and just like building blocks, right? And so, but you had to start from scratch with Revit. And then we also had a project they would normally have 2 or 3 people at most working on for about 6 to 9 weeks. We had 9 different people cycle through. Nobody worked on it for more than 4 weeks other than me. And all of them went through the learning curve. And then by the time they were actually doing anything good, they got yanked off the job. And so it had nothing to do with the technology, really. It was choosing the wrong project and staffing. And so we got pulled up like in front of a principals meeting, right? This is like my first principals meeting. And here's all the principals nationwide on, a teleconference. And they're like, so Kelly, can you tell us about this project? Why did it go wrong? And, everybody wanted to hear is the technology. It's not ready yet. Because that was even in the agenda. The technology's not ready yet. Kelly's going to tell us why, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it had nothing to do with technology. We had 9 different people work on a 40,000 square foot theater project. We had no templates. We had nothing. All of that stuff's built out. We had to start from scratch. Nobody has done a theater job from scratch.
Like 2013, 12, like any like.
6. No, 7. 2007.
Oh, so really? Okay, got it.
Yeah. And so I was like, we had to start from scratch on this. We didn't have any of the blocks. We didn't have any of this. Like, this was so like, I'm up here telling them, you guys are all a bunch of idiots, right? Basically, I mean, not in so many words, but like you screwed up on staffing and you picked the wrong job, you dummies. And, at a lesser firm, I probably would have left there with a box.
Well, because they stuck with it. They kept going.
Well, they did. Basically, fortunately, the design principal, the guy running design, was in my corner, and basically said, "Kelly's right." And so I like to joke that I ended up running, less than a year out of school, I ended up running a nationwide Revit implementation for a, what was at the time a 250 person firm, by basically being the idiot that didn't step back when they said, who wants to run the Revit implementation?
Yeah, you're like forging the beach. You're like this.
Yeah, I'm just like standing there and they're like, who, there's this, I can't remember the movie. There's a scene from their movie, like, anybody who wishes to do this, step forward. And like the entire line of people step back except for one guy. And he's just like, and then it's like, what? I didn't step forward. How did I step? Yeah. So that's how I became, BIM manager or whatever it was.
That's wild, because it is interesting that it became a system-wide change. So like there must have been something in that meeting or something in the way that it was communicated to the leadership that this will be successful if it is a more systemic method.
Well, I don't even think it was. So I'll tell you what flipped the switch for the firm, and it wasn't that meeting. I'm good.
Come on, you're so convincing.
I'm not that good. If I do say so myself, the truth was, in that meeting, I just spoke truth. And so, people recognized that wasn't a good first try. And so basically they gave us another first try. That was the outcome of that meeting. And on that meeting, they involved me and Lewis, another guy who was instrumental in that project, even finishing. We were involved in picking the project. They gave us not, a part-time project manager. They gave us the best project manager in the company. We did a complicated project. It was a big project. It was a church. We had time to go through the learning curve and get people productive. They committed to keeping people on staff on the project for the duration. They basically did everything right that they did wrong on the first.
They didn't know because they didn't know what the proper format for the team should be.
Yeah. And so we on that team though, the project manager was engaged and committed in the success. The team, we had 8 people on that project. It was scheduled to have 12 people by the time we went into CDs. We ended up giving up one of those people because we didn't need them. We finished the job with 7 people. And so the first project was 5x over budget. The second project was actually the most financially successful project in the company's history.
Well, they can measure that. They can measure that because it's doing both.
Yeah, we went from worst to first. and you know, 2 projects, right? And so basically that project wrapped up. The results were fantastic. We did it right. We made mistakes, tons of mistakes, but like we did it right overall. It was the best project on the portfolio for the company financially that year and like the past 15 years. It was awesome. Rolled into the next principals meeting, and they were, you know, everybody was congratulatory, blah, blah, blah. And then they asked Chris, well, you did a great job on this BIM stuff. I'm sure it was stressful. You know, we've got a couple other projects for you to do next. Which one do you want to do next? You know, we give you your choice. There's this thing, there's this thing. You know, this one would be a BIM project, but these other 2, they're renovations and we have CAD backgrounds. So, you know, those other 2 projects will be done in CAD. And Chris said, I don't care which project you give me, but whatever project it is, we're doing it in Revit. They're like, but it has CAD backgrounds. I don't care. We're doing it in Revit. And like that.
Termination.
Well, it like the best project manager in the company, you know, saying I will never do another CAD project again, even if I have to create the Revit background from scratch. Basically, like it just flipped everybody's mindset. Like walking out of that meeting, I had 3 other project managers ask me if their new project could do Revit. So it went from pushing Revit to pulling, like they were pulling me and I was being like, no, I can't support 4 projects simultaneously. Holy crap, are you crazy? Slow down. Which is really
there is something to be said about controlling the full ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's kind of been my MO from the very beginning is that, one, I'm not siloing design and build separately. Don't want to just create paper. I want to create an outcome. Like this is taking, you know, the know-how of a project manager and infusing it in a digital process to practice, test fit, work through challenges together instead of standing on site wondering if the steel is going to fit. That's right. kind of the vibe we're going with. So I love that the back was really recognized that they were a good space for this to really be tested and document the benefits.
Absolutely.
Where did you get the scan? Where did the scanning piece come into? Because you did talk about how there were renovation projects and how the project manager wanted to be in Revit. Where did you go from there with your scanning piece?
Yeah, I think in 2009 we did, maybe it was 2008, but maybe 2008 or 9, we did our first scan. And so it was a renovation project. So we had it was actually First Baptist Dallas, downtown Dallas. They had a huge campus, lots of buildings. And they wanted to build a new worship center and a new education center. And so they were going to tear down a bunch of stuff. They were going to do some adaptive reuse of some stuff. So it was a super complicated job, like, you know, parts of buildings coming down, other parts of buildings remaining, parts of facades being reconstructed from scratch because they had to come down structurally, you know, but it was a historic building and it had to be done proper, like all sorts of...
all of the things in one ecosystem property.
Boom, right? And so it was like, gee, how do we do this? And, you know, I think I had gone to a SPAR, like, gosh, like weeks before this project, we won it. And so then the project manager came to me and was like, it was actually the same project manager that we did our first Revit job with. And he was like, how are we going to do this? You know, it was like, oh, don't worry, Chris, I got this. So it's like, we're going to
SPAR is a conference that is very specifically related to construction technology. Fair?
And at the time, laser scanning specifically. So it's actually broadened its purview recently. Now it's SPAR AEC next, but back in
now it's Geo Week.
That's true. Geo Week. Yeah, that's right.
I want to fly to Denver because
Leslie would slap me on the wrist if it's Geo Week, which includes SPAR AEC next.
Like I don't care what you call it. It's just amazing. It's like everything you need to know. Everything you need to know about reality capture, which I'm going to go a little, so industry speak, reality capture umbrellas, what? Photogrammetry, LiDAR.
Yeah. I mean, technically IoT would be reality capture as well, but most people don't use that they don't fold that under that umbrella typically.
Did you just say like IoT, like Internet of Things?
Yeah. I mean, what are a reality capture? I mean, if you think about building operation systems, right? You know, tracking all the different, that's reality capture. You're capturing the actual performance of equipment in the building in real time and recording that. That's reality capture. It's not, you know, spatial reality capture, but it is reality capture. So
thank you for letting me, like, the industry speak. I want to just kind of make sure that we define our acronyms as we go. So yes, went to SPAR, saw LiDAR.
Saw the LiDAR.
Was it the size of a refrigerator, or was it like smaller by then?
No, it was smaller by then. I mean, that project was scanned with a C10, which is a lovely laser scanner. You know, it still took an hour and a half for a high res scan with it, but not, you know, like 4 minutes like they do now. But yeah, it was you know, a little workhorse, but met a couple firms there that did the work. When I got back, we won this project. It was like, we have to scan it. It's the only way we can do this. And so we scanned it, modeled it. We tried outsourcing part of the modeling because we were limited on fee. And so we sent part of the model over to, I think it was India. That was not very successful. Ended up redoing most of that work. Learned my lesson. And it was a great project. We did, I think, 5 or 6 more projects where we hired out the scanning. And then basically that first scan was, I think, in 2007 or 2008. We did 4 or 5 projects in 2009, and the fee on those 4 or 5 projects was like $275,000 of fees paid out. And so I was like, crap, I can buy a laser scanner myself. You've been there. So
yep. You get a taste of it. It's a drug. I mean, it's a gateway into unlocking all the things that
that matter.
You want to escape from.
Yeah. And so yeah, we bought our own laser scanner. It was bought the first. So that was, gosh, I want to say like 2010 or 2011. We finally got it. That was P20. It was the first Leica's first phase-based scanner. It was fabulous. It was fast. It was broken for the first 6 months because they shipped it too early. And then
nice story. How did you know it was broken, Kelly?
Let's just say there was a very clear sine wave in the data. And so the data looked like everything it measured looked like it was going through a ripple effect in a movie. It was fabulous.
This can't be right.
Yeah.
But that was only because you had used scan data previously. So you knew what it was supposed to look like.
I knew what it was supposed to, I knew what C10 data looked like. I knew it was supposed to look good. This was like by 3 inches. So imagine the wall behind you. You can see the wall is pretty flat and it looks like it has waves in a Moore pattern that are 3 inches thick. You know the wall doesn't look like that. And so it's like, yeah, okay, must deal with. Sent it back. They kept it for another 6 months and then sent it back to us and it worked. But it was a lovely experience. And then we hired up some people. We did that group. I think by the time I left back, we had 6 or 7 people in the Scan to BIM team. We were doing centralized scheduling for the whole company. We were supporting the BIM implementation. We were supporting the use of simple systems in estimating. We were supporting Inkscape for real-time rendering. We had all these different things in our portfolio that we were supporting within the company. And so had about 20 people on the team, and that was not what I thought I'd do when I graduated college, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, you stuck with it, right? So was there any did you stay on like designing structures, or did you kind of move in as the technology coordinator for the effort?
I mean, I went back and forth. So, it was interesting. I think when basically after my first 9 months, when I became BIM manager, which I'm looking at my own LinkedIn profile because I'm trying to remind myself years, was May of 2007. So yeah, right about 12 months after I graduated, like 9 months after I started. But in May, then I was basically technology, and I was supporting, multiple projects using Revit for their first time, which was more than a full-time job. Did that for a while, then basically in 2008, so like 15 months later, we scaled that up to include some other stuff because we were basically only using it on design for the first year and a half. And we weren't taking advantage of the model for pre-construction, for quantity takeoff, for scheduling, for any of these other things. And so we kind of kicked off an internal team of people, so 3 or 4 people in 2008, and we started doing Navisworks at the time, Innovia for estimating, and that was kind of our portfolio. And I was running that team, did that for a couple years, and then it's funny, it's like I was the technology guy, but I really wanted to get back on projects. And so I finally hired up a replacement. Anybody, more than a replacement, actually. If anybody knows Aaron Maller, Aaron is a fount of all things Revit. He knows things about it developers don't know about it. So I finally enticed Aaron to move down from New York. So he took over the BIM implementation from me. And that let me go back to projects. And so actually, like, I got to work on some of the coolest projects the company was doing as an actual project person while running this team. And so I worked,
like with the design hat on that you had gone to school for. And
yeah, so I designed super cool, super complicated facade and structure, manage the structure for this building in South Korea. So, this project was like built underneath a road. The entire worship, it was a church. The entire worship center was underground because the site was actually too small for a worship center of the size they wanted. So they bought the land under the road from the city and put the stage was under the road. Now think about the implications of that for noise, dampenings, all that kind of stuff, right? So this really, really complex project. It was, 17 stories tall, above ground. It was 8 stories, below ground. It just really, really kind of a jewel box of a building. And I was lead on the skin and the structure. Working directly with the director of design on this stuff. And so that was a blast. And then managing the consultant on the structure. And then I got to put on the construction hat and I went out on site on the Kimbell Art Museum, the Renzo Piano expansion to the Louis Kahn Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth. And I was on site for 18 months and working on the construction side, did the shop. I did the shop drawings for the concrete sub, all in 3D. Like there was just all sorts of just really cool stuff. And so I spent about 3 years deeply engaged in actual projects, doing design and construction work. And I guarantee you, I would not have been able to be on both of those projects if I had not had the technology chops that I had. Because basically they needed that intense capability with technology for those projects to be successful. And
that is one of the things I've heard criticized about building information modeling being in Revit, that it suppresses the creative, that it is too linear, it's too blocky, it's too challenging. And what I think is really interesting is that as a designer, I don't want to design anything that cannot be built. And so you're talking about a very complex structure that is in a foreign country and it needs to interact with the existing conditions in a very unique way. But it was actually that 3D environment that made it possible for you to creatively unlock what it was you wanted to do as a designer, because it could be in that 3D environment to test it.
Am I allowed to share my screen since this is on YouTube?
I mean, I suppose. I mean, I've never really done this with my, so we just have to narrate for those who are listening.
I'll do it. I'll like do it super quick, but I like it. Yeah. I just want to point this out. This project was done in like 2000 and 2000, probably 2009, 2000. Yeah, it's 2009. But like, oh, of course, it's not going to open this. It's going to open this out here.
Give it a minute. We're cool.
Yeah, here we go.
I should have known. I should have known every time we work together and scan to BIM. We're like, let me just share my screen for a minute.
But like this was done in 2009 through 2011 in Revit.
And this is what is the name of this building?
This is the SaRang Global Ministry Center in Seoul, South Korea. And this is not a circular, this is a conic, a distended conic section. It's an oval that grows as it gets further up the building. I mean, this is about as far as you can get from a rectilinear linear building. The whole thing is like just, off the charts.
Stretched and pulled and curved and,
all done in Revit. I mean, here's a screenshot in Revit, right, of the facade modeled with curtain wall and a complex screen and curving elements. And this is the kind of stuff people would say, oh, you can't do that in BIM. It's like baloney. Like this is exactly what BIM was made for. Like, these complex projects, there's no way we could have done this. I mean, here's some shots, like actual real life shots underground, right? Here's your stage that's under the road. Here's a better one, like right there. That's underground. Those are skylights with baffles that close them off when they don't want natural light, right? I mean, this is underground, complex. This is done in Revit in 2009.
I mean, in 2016, Revit was crashing on me every, I don't know, I could keep it open for 45 minutes. So there it is.
There it is built, right?
There it is. That's and you were able to express your design vision in a render that was connected directly to the same file that you were going to be building from.
Yeah, there's that little facade that I had a snippet from, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like all of this. Now there's things that drive me crazy. Like, these were supposed to be radius mullions, and every time I see it, I die a little on the inside. We did the whole thing with flat glass. We figured out how to make every panel flat, but dang it, the cuts were supposed to be radius, and it just hurts my soul. But anyway.
Yeah, I feel for the design eye in that category, but the average walker on that road is still saying, oh my gosh, that is very compelling.
Yeah, but doing that building in AutoCAD would have been a flipping nightmare. Would have been so tough.
There's a show, right? So there's a show, I think it's called How It's Built. And I instantly clicked on it and I was all excited because I kept waiting. I'm like, when are they going to say BIM? When are they going to say BIM? And I'm watching the one about Gary and the Louis Vuitton museum in Paris. And finally they get to this little piece that this was all made possible, because so much of it was prefabricated. And so many of the panels and sails that were part of that architecture needed to be fabricated by specialists in a different country, and they need to know the fit and how it was going to get configured and installed and shipped and all of that. And finally, it was said, it was like, well, for this building, the planning and design was developed in technology borrowed from aerospace, a technology called BIM.
There you go. One line mention.
Oh my God. Come on, Kelly. What you're sitting in your living room and you're watching this episode, and what are you thinking when you hear that line?
Well, there's nothing inaccurate about it. You could argue that aerospace borrowed it from shipbuilding, but it's like, I don't know. It
is 3D modeling. It's just what it is. It's using computers to leverage design and imagination and verifying that it's possible. And that's what I love, is that there's less constraints when you're actually configuring these really imaginative structures.
Well, and it's like I said earlier, I think it's legitimate for somebody that has spent a life designing in another technology, be it hand drawing, AutoCAD, whatever. When they first pick up a new technology, it is inhibiting because they don't know how to use it. It is inhibiting, right? The technology is not what's inhibiting it, though. It's that person's ability to use the technology that's the actual source of the inhibition. If you take somebody that has been facile in that tool from the get-go, I learned how to design in 3D modeling tools. That's my primary tool for design. So to me, moving to BIM was trivial. because it is core, it's 3D modeling with some additional layers on top of it. And those are very important layers. So, not to trivialize those, but it is at its core, it's 3D modeling. And if you are facile modeling in 3D, then yeah, it's just a matter of, it's a convenient design tool that allows for a great deal more complexity. Because how do you, how do you coordinate marrying, a 17-story tower that's sitting on top of a parking garage with a worship center that's got free spans of 80 meters nested right in the middle of it, like a circle, and you've got to bring all these things down. You have to have all these transfer conditions. You have to do all of this complex stuff. And oh, by the way, the skin changes on every floor because of the profiles. And yes, I mean, technically speaking, you could do it in AutoCAD. It would just be a nightmare. And we did it with way less people in way less time using BIM, because it gives you that ability to kind of coordinate all that stuff without having to put effort into the coordination part. You put effort into the design. And
you feel the reward. So you're circling back to your heroes and your design heroes and what they were at the time. And I feel like many of the common audience may miss the fact that there has been a translation of what the designer was in that era versus what the current industry market is like, because there is that was part of when I started this company. I had to do some research into the past and say, what was it before? And I was studying Trinity Church in Boston, and how the architect does take absolute accountability, not for the design, but overseeing the execution. And that the definition of general contractor was derived from the contractor that was responsible for the general conditions of the site, and how they basically they leased the quarry so that they were in absolute control of the timelines, the quality of every stone that was coming out of that quarry. It wasn't left to any other responsibility other than need a designer. And then how is that feeding into what's happening in the industry now?
Oof. I mean, so much has changed. I don't know. I take a pretty what's the right word for this? I have a very unpopular view of the AIA. And I have a very negative view of the AIA, because I feel like, it's my belief, true or not, it's my belief that the AIA is almost singularly responsible for the situation that our profession is in right now, being squeezed on fees, being relegated to the side in terms of having any control over what gets built. Basically, I feel like the AIA has been on a systematic mission of reducing liability, which sounds great if you don't know anything about business. They've been trying to reduce liability in the architectural profession since their founding. And the problem is, when you cut out liability, you also cut out reward, because clients pay people to take risk. I mean, that's business. If you wanted to, go at the meta level, business is all about getting paid to take a risk. That's why businesses exist, right? Somebody pays you money to do something that they don't want to do themselves, or they can't do themselves. And your value is how much of that risk you take on. And so the problem that we've run into in our profession is basically we've de-risked ourselves. And by de-risking ourselves, we no longer have any control. We're not responsible for anything. All we're really responsible for is making drawings. And that's it. That's our deliverable. It's in a contract. It's the only thing we can be held liable to. And we can't actually even be held liable for most of that because of errors and omissions and standard of care and all these other beautiful words and terminologies that lawyers have invented thanks to the AIA. And basically now, if we screw up, it's not our fault. Good luck suing us. Shoot, what risk are we taking? Why is the owner even paying us money? Oh, they're only paying us money because somebody got the bright idea that we should make it a legal requirement. So architects went from being a desired knowledge center that people sought after and you wanted an architect on your job 75 years ago. You wanted an architect. It was cool. It was great. And now we live in a world where if you talk to most developers, they hire an architect because they're legally required to, not because they want them. They wish they could cut them out.
And that's what I think is so interesting is that there's so much of the aesthetic and the vision and the passion associated with creating a building or a structure. And I want to be part of the outcome. Like that just seems like a strange disconnect for me, but I completely understand that the complexities of the structures, the timelines of the execution, like all of that makes it very difficult to take full accountability. And
and I don't think anybody, would argue that full accountability is viable either. But I think it's one of those things where the pendulum swung way too far. Mm-hmm. And then, at the same time, you've got, and there are other trends. The fact that buildings are much more complex. There's much more complex systems. One master builder can't possibly know everything they need to know to manage the entire outcome of a building. That's just not viable with the complexity of systems.
We've got to start looking for tools that allow each of those masters of their discipline to infuse their knowledge. I thought this really cool thing on LinkedIn. It was a structural engineer describing the power of the 3D environment for testing structural loads, because years previous, they would take a slice. They would take that slice and they would engineer through the slice, but failed to conceptualize how every part and piece of the 3D environment impacted the structure or the load. And so now they can start unlocking that calculation ability again.
Yeah, and they can look at every component and design a more efficient structure rather than having these massive safety factors. And so there's so much going on. And so it's not like, I don't long for the days of the master builder, because those days are long gone because buildings are far more complex. But I think, the industry has seen I think owners have seen the downside of the kind of traditional design bid build model. They're frustrated that the architects don't take any accountability for the price. They're frustrated that the contractors don't take any accountability for the quality of the build. Wins every argument, and so the building looks like crap. Oh, well, you make the architect more powerful, and now the cost is skyrocketing because the contractor can't get any commitments on things in time to procure materials, and the schedule gets delayed. And it's not a sustainable way to keep this profession going for the next 100 years. We've got to find a different business model that recognizes that the architect is responsible for the building. They're not responsible for just drawings, and they're responsible for that. They're not responsible for the construction of the building, but they're responsible for the performance of the building, right? Whether that's the design performance, whether that's acoustic performance, whether it's like, if architects want to start getting paid more money again, if we don't want the profession to die, and basically be subsumed under these, build arrangements, which is what we've seen in other countries, I will point out. If we don't want to go that way in the United States, we got to start taking responsibility for some stuff, otherwise, give it another 30 years and architects are just going to be all working at design build companies or working for owners directly. We won't have these massive architecture firms, doing all this documentation work, because guess what? That stuff's just going to get subsumed, absorbed, and disappear. And
there is a way to look abroad and see what other countries are doing with this, because there was less of maybe a cultural situation for how things are designed and constructed. And so I think that's really interesting, and that leads really well into where you are now at ClearEdge, because there are so much. I mean, I will say this over and over again. I wanted to get into design and construction, and suddenly I find myself like I'm a technology guru. I'm on Scan to BIM talking about best practices for a LiDAR and what a DAC is. And I'm like, I never wanted to know this, but what that technology is providing me as a professional and my clients has been so significant. But like with ClearEdge and the way that, I mean, it says it like, you know, it's moving at light speed, but it's not necessarily percolating into the work practices. And so that where are you seeing like real consumption, and how are you really alleviating and creating accessibility for this?
Yeah, and I wish I could remember this off the top of my head, but I wrote some LinkedIn article ages ago that you know, basically, you know, from the way I see it, there's kind of three big barriers to innovation in the construction, in the vertical construction and horizontal construction, you know, industry, right? The first one is the kind of interfirm stuff, right? It's the you know, hey, you know, so-and-so project manager doesn't want to use BIM. It's not on my project. I don't want to use BIM. I know AutoCAD. Stick with AutoCAD. Blah, blah. It's the old fogies. It's just the kind of human resistance to change, right? And that is something that, you know, I felt like I had a meaningful impact on in my tenure at Beck. And you know, through speaking and, you know, training other firms and other stuff that I did in that time frame. And I kind of felt like, at least for BIM, for the technologies that I knew really well, that I'd kind of made that impression. Like I'd done what I could. And what I ran into, you know, was that, you know, I kind of hit the next barrier. Well, I hit the next two barriers. The next barrier is really just because the business models in our industry have such narrow profit margins, our industry spends so little money on innovation and technology and all these other things. And so, you know, I spent kind of my last couple of years at Beck, you know, I was going, and back in 2010, I went to SIGGRAPH, and I saw real-time rendering, and we wanted real-time rendering because we were doing all these 3D models, and we brought the company in to do a demo, and we gave them one of our models, and they, you know, pretty quickly got it up to do real-time rendering in 2010. And then, you know, but they were, and I was like, this is amazing. The principals were amazed. Everybody was amazed. It was incredible. And then it was like, what's a license? $120,000 a license. What? That's our entire fee on project.
I mean, I went to one conference and I was asking like how much for this platform, and literally every one of them said $5,000 a year. I'm like, did y'all just have like a lunch and learn before the conference? Because it is really hard to price. It is really hard to price what a software solution is to an industry that is this inclined.
Yes, well, and that's the issue, is like the margins aren't there. Like this company, they did real-time rendering for the automotive industry, and they designed something once, and then they made 100 or 1 million of those things. Yeah, and they earn a return on every one of them. And so $120,000 for a real-time rendering solution for their designers was just a drop in the bucket. I was like, sure, where do I give me my checkbook? Can we get two? Right? In our industry, it was like, laugh them out of the building.
I get to do it once on one thing. I'm not selling this thing another time.
Yeah, it's like, I'm done. You know, it's like one and done, baby. So, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, how do we, you know, so I saw that with real-time rendering, and it took almost another decade from the first time I saw the real-time rendering in automotive to when we actually got reasonable real-time rendering in our industry. You know, same thing, because actually it was 2009 when I saw SIGGRAPH, and I can't remember when Inkscape like finally got to the point that it was like really, really usable, but it was like 2016 or 2017, I think. Like it was,
because like when I was in 2018 is when I first saw it, and it was obviously been around a bit.
So it's like, it just takes, we have this long lead time. We get second or third hand technology. And it's like, your comment earlier about, oh, it was adopted from aerospace. It's like, and it's true, because aerospace has the money. And so they get the tech first and then we get it. And so, a big part of why I went to ClearEdge is I saw so much potential in reality capture as a technology, but applying it to actual workflows in building construction was non-trivial. I mean, it was really difficult and it took a lot of effort. And so, how do we take that and make it easier? How do we make it easier for people to use this? How do we make it take less time and less money to leverage this data for something meaningful? And so I kind of wanted to apply myself at that second problem, which is actually getting the technology into a state where it's usable and adoptable by the industry. And then, there's still, you still have to get over that first hurdle, which is the actual human disinclination to change. But I was like, I put in my 10 years doing that. And I was like, I need a break from that. It's tough, hard
work. Dragging the reluctant child out of the toy store.
And so it's tough, hard work. I did it. I let, somebody else can do that for the next decade. I'm going to try and bring some technology solutions that somebody else gets to apply. And then I will try and apply my knowledge and experience to making them as easy as possible to, adopt, given.
Yeah, because you have to make sure that, and then that's something that's really great to hear. Where we are in the technology evolution is that now the fundamentals are established, the capabilities are established, and now we get to fine tune it and say, well, how to create a pleasant, more polite experience for the professional or even the end user of these software solutions, of this technology.
Yeah, and there's a great book, Crossing the Chasm. Like, anybody who hasn't read this, it's a great theory on adopting technology in any industry, right? But it applies well to ours as well. And just, trying to take these things that are kind of early adopter tools and technologies and bring them to the, early majority or the late majority, so that those people can, that aren't willing to put in that effort to try something new just because it's how they're wired, but they can just get up to speed and start leveraging it to make our profession more effective. Yeah, of course, It's
okay to find an easy button here, folks. I feel like there was
easier.
If I use the easy button, then my work is going to be lesser, or that I will have thought less of the execution or strategy of it. I'm like,
no, it lets you think more.
It allows you to think more. It allows you to think bigger. It allows you to execute more, and it creates an environment where you have inclusion. How's everyone going to use this space? There is just key information when you're in a real-time render of a file that's going to be used for construction documents, and you get to experience what those 3D environments feel like. So powerful.
Going back to my core problem, how do we make architects relevant again? How do we give architects the ability to take on more responsibility? Well, they need to spend less time manually dimensioning 475 sheets of drawings. Like, they need to spend less time flipping text notes on stuff. They need to spend less time managing all this complexity, and just more time actually doing the work that matters, which is making the outcome, the building, good. And so and the third problem is legal. The third problem is all this cruft of here's how, projects work, business model, stuff like that. But the guy that ran Beck when I joined Beck, Peter Beck, so a family-owned business. Peter had this thing that he always told us. He'd say, Kelly, there are problems and then there are predicaments. Do you know what the difference is? And I'm I'm the guy that goes to read the dictionary as soon as you ask me that question, which was not the right answer. And he was like, the difference is, Kelly, you can solve problems. And, his point being that, some things, and, for me at the time as an intern 3 years out of school, there were a lot of predicaments that I couldn't solve, but there were problems I could solve. And so I should focus on the problems, right? And, one of these days I hope to be at a point, in my career where maybe that legal cruft, the business model, all that stuff is no longer a predicament and is actually a problem. And maybe I'll go tackle that one day, but at least right now, all that stuff is still legitimately a predicament for me. So I'm going to focus on the problem that I can solve, which, is an exciting, interesting problem of how do we automate this process of taking reality capture data and creating a digital twin, and then keeping those things in sync and up to date, and managing all the different outcomes of that data, whether it's QA/QC in the field validating work is built correctly, whether it's making sure the models match the as-built conditions, whether it's extracting as-built models on these rapidly increasing number of adaptive reuse projects that are going to be happening in the world as we have more and more building stock that we need to reuse and not tear down. And those are meaningful, interesting, exciting problems. So,
and it would be great to get some more time to solve for those solutions and more tools to solve for those.
And so what we need for that, of course, is for people to go out and, invest that very small amount of money they have in their firm for innovation. We need to, we need to get that investment by having people buy software, because
real-time render software does not cost $120K anymore.
No, it doesn't. And
that's does not.
and the reason why is because, technology and time, with time, technology gets better. Time heals all wounds with technology, and things get cheaper over time. And this will get cheaper over time, but it gets there because the automotive industry pumped a lot of money into it, and that slowly lowered the cost, and to the point that it came down into our industry. But, we'd sure like for our industry to take the lead on some of this stuff. And so, get out there, spend a little bit of money, buy a license or two of experimental software. There's tons of startups, and I would encourage anyone at a firm that's engaged in the technology buying process, yes, you want to buy tools that have a meaningful impact on your process and can be put in use today on real projects, right? That's the number one criteria for buying software. But where you can, try and find a little bit of budget to invest in emerging technology. So whether it's things like test fit as a design tool, or whether it's things like ClearEdge for scan to BIM, or things like that, we survive or we starve based off the software purchases. And we don't sell hundreds of licenses to a company like Autodesk. We sell 1 or 2 licenses to every company. And that's a lot of hard work to build all those new relationships. So, get out there. If you're frustrated by the rate of technology advancement in our industry, think about the role that you have to play in that, right?
Oh, it's a Gandhi quote. Be the change you want to see.
Be the change. Invest. You've got it. It doesn't have to be a lot, but find things to invest in and support companies that are trying to make a change in the industry. And that will give them the money they need to actually make that change happen.
I know it's like chicken, egg, all those things, but you are wearing a Scan to BIM shirt. And I feel like that's an incredible resource that ClearEdge is pushing out, is just communicating. We talked about conferences. I had Chad Studer on from Nor Technologies, and the one thing that he had wished he had said was go to conferences, and we get to start actually going to conferences again. And that's where, we met at conferences. I've met people that are in the circle of Scan to BIM, which at this point is still relatively small. So it's a great time to kind of get out there and really investigate, and if anybody wants to reach out to you, you are on LinkedIn, you have a great bio. And if you're curious about any of the ClearEdge products, they are incredible, and they are very specific solutions to specific problems. But there's an infrastructure there to support that implementation.
Yeah. Who doesn't want to get a massive head start on their Scan to BIM?
Who doesn't want to be able to test their concrete slab for embeds?
I know, right? There's all sorts of wonderful problems technology can solve.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're interested in more inside the firm, there's YouTube and Inside the Firm on Instagram. Find us. And of course, if you're a female in the industry, or if you want to support women in the industry, there's womeninbim.org. Please reach out to me for that, and reach out to Kelly for anything that you're curious about in the scan BIM world. There's lots of webinars out there pushing all that out. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
You also.